1943, Eastern European Front. A ruined city, abandoned streets, fog rolling through debris. I was barely 19 when they sent me to the Eastern Front. They called it a scouting mission, but even before we reached the outskirts, I knew that word was a lie. The city had been bombed relentlessly. Buildings crumbled like sandcastles, and the air was thick with the stench of smoke, blood, and something else I couldn't name. My unit moved silently, the crunch of broken glass beneath our boots sounding far too loud in the desolate streets. Every shadow seemed alive, twisting and writhing as though the darkness itself were mocking us. I kept my rifle raised, though my hands shook so violently I thought it might betray me. The first night we camped in what was left of a collapsed apartment block. The walls were scarred with claw marks, not human, not animal, but something in between. Some of the older soldiers muttered curses, others said prayers under their breath. I couldn't tell which was more protective, luck or faith. As the night deepened, a soft scraping sound echoed through the ruins. At first I thought it was rats or shifting rubble, but then I heard it again, deliberate, rhythmic, almost communicating. "Stay alert," whispered Sergeant Kroll. His face was pale, eyes wide as though he'd already seen what was coming. "It knows we're here." That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows moving across the walls. Not reflections, not illusions. Something was alive, watching, waiting. By dawn, 2 of our men had vanished. No struggle, no blood, just empty sleeping bags and their rifles left behind. A few of us whispered about the fallen, a term older soldiers used when describing horrors no one would name. They said the fallen were souls lost in the chaos of war, twisted by pain, by fear, by death. We kept moving, though the city itself seemed alive, groaning under the weight of destruction. At every corner I felt eyes on me, cold and heavy. Once I swore I saw a figure standing atop a ruined building, staring directly at me, grinning in a way no human could. I blinked, and it was gone. Days blurred into nights. Supply lines were gone, radios silent, food scarce. Fear became a constant companion. And every time we thought we were alone, the sounds returned. Scraping, whispers, footsteps echoing behind us, though no one was there. One night, I found myself separated from the others, hiding in the remnants of a cathedral. Moonlight filtered through shattered stained glass, painting the floor with colors that didn't belong to the world anymore. That's when I saw it. Tall, impossibly thin, face obscured by shadows, standing silently in the nave. Its head tilted, and I felt a presence that froze my blood. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs refused to move. The shadow raised its hand slowly, pointing at me, and then I understood, somehow, that it knew me, not as a soldier, not as a human. It knew my fear. It had been waiting, patient, growing stronger in the darkness that war had created. Days later, when I rejoined the unit, I noticed something different. 2 more men had disappeared. Their empty boots lay where they had slept, as though they had walked into the night on their own. Only the shadow remained, ever present, reminding us that the war outside was nothing compared to the war within the ruins.
The ruins of Eastern European city. Forest outskirts, nighttime. The days blurred into each other, each moment stretching like taffy, heavy with fear and the stench of death. Our unit had lost count of how many had vanished. Friends, comrades, men who had laughed the day before, now nothing more than whispers in the ruins. On the 3rd night after the cathedral encounter, we moved toward the forest beyond the city. The trees were skeletal, branches like twisted hands, and the fog clung to the ground, curling around our legs as though trying to pull us under. Every rustle, every snapping twig sent jolts of terror through my body. "Keep close," Sergeant Kroll whispered. "It follows." I wanted to ask him, what follows? But fear choked the words before they left my throat. I had begun to understand. The shadows were not just in the ruins, they were everywhere now, feeding on our terror, multiplying with every heartbeat. We stumbled upon a village, abandoned yet eerily intact. Fires had burned long ago, leaving blackened walls, but the smell lingered, sharp and bitter. And then we heard them. The whispers. Low, guttural, coming from the windows, from the broken doors, from the very walls. Private Miro tried to make a joke, but it fell flat. The others stared at him as though he had spoken a blasphemy. And that's when we saw it. A figure, taller than any man, emerging from the fog. Its limbs stretched at impossible angles, head tilting unnaturally, and eyes that gleamed with crimson fire. It paused, looking at each of us, measuring, weighing, and then it vanished into the night. The forest seemed to close around us as we tried to flee, but the fog was alive, curling around us like serpents, whispering our deepest fears. Some of the men cried out and disappeared, swallowed whole, leaving only a scream behind. I held my rifle, shaking, but it was useless. We were trapped, not by the enemy, not by terrain, by something older, hungrier, something that thrived on war and chaos. That night, as I huddled against a dead tree, I wrote in my journal, if I survived, someone would read this. The words spilled like blood. The shadows know our names. They wait in the dark, feeding on the screams of the living. Do not trust the light, for even it lies. A scream tore through the darkness, cutting through the fog. I looked up and saw Sergeant Kroll, his face contorted in horror, dragged backward by invisible hands. He vanished before anyone could react. Only the sound of his struggle remained, echoing in the trees, growing fainter, then silent. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs bled, until the forest itself seemed to open a path. But the feeling never left me, the sensation of eyes following, of something breathing just behind me, something patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When dawn broke, the forest was quiet, too quiet. The air was thick, almost viscous with the remnants of nightmares. I was alone, yet I knew I was not. The shadows had followed. They always did, and I understood that the war outside, the bombs, the guns, the chaos, was nothing compared to the war that had begun inside these haunted ruins. I pressed forward, knowing that each step was both survival and damnation. Every shadow I passed could have been the fallen, the corrupted souls of men lost to the darkness, or something far older, far crueler, lurking behind the veil of night. And with each passing hour, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. You cannot escape. You are one of us now.
Bombed-out European cities, refugee camps, secret military bunkers, nighttime and daybreak. Weeks blurred into a nightmare. Entire cities had been reduced to ash and rubble. I walked through streets where every building had been hollowed by fire. Every window gaped like a screaming mouth. The smell of charred bodies and smoke was everywhere, mingling with the cold wind that carried whispers from shadows too numerous to count. Survivors moved like ghosts themselves, faces pale, eyes hollow, carrying only memories and fear. Yet the whispers were not gone, they were stronger. Every dark alley, every ruined street corner held a presence, something that moved with intention, stalking the living. We were called to a bunker far underground, a place that promised safety. Soldiers, scientists, and desperate civilians huddled in cramped rooms, listening to the distant thunder of bombs above. But the bunker was no sanctuary. Shadows crept along the walls, shifting, stretching, manifesting in forms that defied human logic. Some claimed they saw fallen comrades, faces twisted in agony, warning them to flee, but they could not. And then came the messages, written on walls, scratched into metal panels, appearing on screens left abandoned by technicians. The war is only beginning. The world will burn, and they will rise. Night after night, I dreamed of cities aflame, oceans boiling, skies tearing open with fire. The whispers followed me into sleep, murmuring promises of despair. When I awoke, I could not tell if the screams I heard were real or echoes of the nightmares that now seemed as tangible as flesh. One morning, we were led to a command room, walls lined with maps marked in red. Military officials spoke in hushed tones about rumors from the front lines. Entire battalions had vanished without a trace. The shadows had spread beyond Europe, touching Asia, Africa, even the Americas. It was as if the darkness that had thrived in ruined cities had now learned to walk across continents. An explosion shook the bunker. Dust rained from the ceiling, and a roar, human and not human at once, echoed from the tunnels. Some men ran screaming, only to vanish in the black corridors, swallowed by the very shadows that had stalked them for weeks. I saw faces pressed against walls, mouths moving silently, eyes staring into mine, yet no one was there. From the windows of the command room, I saw fires spreading across cities that had survived the initial attacks. Entire nations crumbled overnight. WW3 was no longer a warning, it had begun. And with it, the shadows thrived, feeding on panic, chaos, and death. I wandered the bunkers, searching for survivors, but the shadows were everywhere. Every corner I turned, every stairway I descended, the darkness followed, patient, intelligent, hunting. And then I realized they were learning, adapting, becoming stronger with every life they consumed. We had weapons, strategies, even intelligence, but none of it mattered. They were not human, not bound by the rules of war or reality. They fed on fear, and the more we feared, the faster they multiplied. Entire armies fell silently, leaving only echoes of their existence. I found a notebook in one of the ruined offices, filled with frantic writings. They are the remnants of the wars we forgot, the souls of those consumed by fire and blood. They whisper, and we obey. The world will burn, and we will be nothing but memories, whispered warnings to those who follow. By the third week of WW3, I realized that survival was no longer enough. The shadows did not tire, they did not sleep. They were everywhere, in the ruins, in bunkers, in our own minds. I could hear them, faint whispers even in daylight, promising doom. And as I write this now in a forgotten shelter miles from civilization, I understand the truth. The wars were not about nations, borders, or politics. They were about feeding something older, hungrier, that had waited in the darkness, ready to consume the living world.